we had the idea to take those old pocket watches, the guts of them, the movement, the dial, the face of it, and the hands, and upcycle the inside of those pocket watches into modern wristwatches. So it's 100 years old on the inside, and it's fully modern on the outside. And that's a VORTIC watch, like Vortex and TikTok, a beautiful clash of old and new.
Hello there and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. My name's Rick Nuske. I am your host. I hope you're doing wonderfully well today. It's great to be with you once again. I love hosting this show. It's just such a great experience for me as it is for you, hopefully. So again, if you're joining us on the show today for the first time, it's great to have you here. And if you've been supporting the show for any length of time, thank you very much for that support. Now, on today's show, I have the pleasure of welcoming co-founder of VORTIC Watches, Mr. RT Custer. Welcome to the show, RT.
Thanks for having me, Rick. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely great to have you here. Now, during the call, you and I will be discussing your motivation for starting VORTIC, the challenges the brand faced when competing with overseas manufacturers, and we'll also be taking a look at the innovative growth strategy the business has implemented, including influencer marketing and the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative. So there's that and so much more to unpack on this call today. So where are you calling in from today, RT?
I'm sitting in my shop here, our manufacturing facility in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Yeah, you and I touched briefly about manufacturing, where we're at, and it must be a busy time, and certainly think lots of things are happening. But we also discussed your wonderful background. What's going on behind you there? You got a whole heap of stuff.
So totally. So it all started with this one up in the corner. That's a Springbank Scotch from Campbelltown, Scotland, and that's one of the few, it seems like, independent distilleries left. Most of these distilleries and most of these other brands and companies of the liquor bottles behind me are owned by massive conglomerates. But that one's independent to my knowledge. And I was sitting there with my dad right after I turned 21. And so the Scotch in that bottle is almost exactly as old as I am.
Oh, fantastic. I love that.
So that's how it started. And they all have some sort of story or, a collector's piece that I got on my way back from, Scotland or Ireland, or, I have a bunch of tequila from Mexico and some other just, fun stuff behind me, as well as some of my favorite books.
There's some fun times and some headaches, I'm pretty sure. Now tell us about, you obviously love reading, and you've isolated one particular book. Why is that?
Yeah, right over my head there is Alex Hormozy, one of his books. That one's the $100 million leads book. He's got a few of them now, and I think there's another one coming, but I'm just a Hormozy fan. And, I think a lot of the content that he puts out is so valuable, and I'm just astonished at how much value he adds without having to pay for it. So yes. I try to support him because he's supported me and he doesn't even know me.
Yeah, it's a great content, that's for sure and certain. Now, you talked about that bottle of Scotch up there, and how it being owned by big conglomerates, and I know that you are a big supporter of local manufacturing, and again we're obviously going to talk about that and your desire to do everything onshore, but we'll get to that in a moment. But tell us, when you're not working, because I know you're flat out busy, what do you like doing with yourself? Do you have any hobbies, sports? What do you get into?
Yeah, well, the reason I have the Scotch is my dad and I have gone to Scotland and places near there and near to us and near to our hearts, at least, to play golf. Oh. And so that's my thing. The home of golf there is just so fun to visit. Typically, I just drive down the street though and play golf somewhere here in Colorado. And when I'm able to, I do that, but most of my free time now is with my family. I have two little boys, 5 and 7. And so Sawyer and Wesley get most of my time between them and my wife, Lindsay. I try to spend time with them and family time and teach them, any life skills that I have that I can try to pass on, including golf, and maybe business if they want to be entrepreneurs like me. But
I tell you what, if I was to teach,
be a good dad.
If I was to teach my boys golf, they'd learn how to core grass. That's for sure and certain. Yeah, well, you talked about your family, and I've got a lot of time for my family. I put them first because at the end of the day, business fundamentally doesn't change, but our families do, and their needs drive a lot of what I do. How important is having that time away from the business to focus on your family?
Well, when you've been an entrepreneur as long as I have, which is approaching 11 years now,
Mm,
you realize a few things. And I guess you realize that all those sayings that people say are totally true. Money does not buy happiness.
hmm.
I can tell you that for sure. I've had it, I've lost it, I've earned it, I've spent it.
Did I?
Um, it's all about who you know, not what you know. And I think it all comes back to that why. Like everybody's why is different, but like why do you do what you do? Some people do it for family, like they are a family man and they are a family person, and it's all about the family, and it's all about bringing home and carving out that time. Some people do it for like just the meaning of life. Some people do it for their dream or their vision. I talk about the American dream a lot, and the pros and cons of that and how it changes. But for me, I have there's a plaque kind of like behind my camera on my desk here. And it's to remind me like what I do. I grew up on a Christmas tree farm in Pennsylvania. And so tree analogies, I think, hit home for me. But this quote says, "The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit." And to me, that, as a father of boys, if I can teach them some of those things by doing some of those things that aren't for me, whether I'm doing it for my family, I'm doing it for my team, my employees, my suppliers, all the American jobs that I create, or even, for myself, um, there's beauty in the passion of the day to day. And all of that comes from working towards something that's bigger than you, in my opinion.
Yeah,
So,
that's
so yeah, it's not just for family. It's not just for me. It's not just for any one thing. It's the the pursuit of life, and that every day is different. And I get to do this, and I don't have to do this.
yeah. What a wonderful set of circumstances that you've brought about. Now, yeah, it's not been without its challenges, and we'll be talking about those in a moment. But I'd love to know what your favorite foods are. What do you like to
Yeah.
eat?
So, I mean, for me, I am a red meat person.
I figured.
I like
I had a feeling.
steak and eggs. Yeah, steak and eggs. I mean, I go to the gym a lot. I work out, and I do it mostly for the mental health benefits. But I need a lot of protein to fuel my body, and
Hmm.
so I found red meat to be the best. So I'm usually I say I'm steak and sushi, for dinner, which is expensive, but like,
You
you
got to
get what you
have
pay for. And so
it.
that's what I want. So it's like, okay, well, there's more motivation to go run a big business and make some money at the same time. And unfortunately, Lindsay and I introduced the kids to sushi too. And so now they have,
Oh.
they have that taste. So that was a mistake. That was a mistake for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, somebody asked me the other day, like, if you could eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? And I said eggs. I have eggs every morning for breakfast.
Hmm.
Gosh, I love breakfast for lunch, breakfast for dinner. I mean, I could eat eggs anytime, anywhere. So
I'm with you. I'm with
those are my things.
you talk about going to the gym a lot, and I can't live without it. I can't, live without that morning routine of,
Mm.
doing what I do. How important is it to you? Do you ever suffer a lack of motivation in the morning when you want to pull the covers over your head? And if you do, what do you do to get over bumps in the day like that?
Yeah, so I don't struggle too much
Mm.
with like not being able to get out of bed or start the day.
Yep.
Although I have little kids, so I don't have the luxury of
Yeah, you
getting the
don't.
sleep in. They're like, Dad, Mom, what are we
Now.
make me a sandwich? Yeah. So at like 6 a.m. So like so it's a little different, I think, as a dad, but yeah, the only thing that I struggle with, sometimes in the morning is really distracted by the news or technology, especially
Mm.
times like these. Like I'm trying to keep up with tariffs and taxes
Oh yeah.
and all that stuff, and so I want to keep up, but I get sucked in. I go down those rabbit holes on
Yeah, it's a
social media
vacuum.
sometimes. And I justify it by saying like I'm learning something, or like I'm staying up to date, but really it's just this mind-numbing scroll of getting sucked into that. But yeah, routine is super important, and I definitely feel it on the days that I work out. and I get a good workout and I'm lifting weights. I'm not just like doing basic exercises. On the days where I really push myself in the morning, I feel like I get way more done throughout the day. They say do the hard thing first.
Yeah.
And I can't, there's no way I could find motivation to work out at lunchtime or after work at this point in my life. So if I don't start with working out, it's just not going to happen. And I've learned that about myself, but I definitely feel a lot more productive, mentally, especially, and a lot more focused if I move my body first.
It's a very interesting situation for a leader of an organization, I think, mentally, because you have a lot of different challenges than those who may be working on the line, manufacturing the actual bits and pieces, let's call them. So how do you switch off? Do you ever get to a point where you're just so overloaded that you are either having to switch off, or do you choose to switch off? Do you sleep well? How does that all unfold for you?
So I sleep well because I'm exhausted. I mean, I give every day 110%. Otherwise, like you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I can't take a break, right? Like I get the break time, and to answer your question, like how I switch off, I really enjoy driving. I have an 18-minute drive from my house to my place of business here. And I really enjoy podcasts. And so, that's part of the reasons I do podcasts like this as a guest, because I love listening to podcasts, and I love learning new things. And so, I listen to podcasts when I'm in the car. And I don't have the luxury of totally tuning out, because as soon as I get home after that 18-minute drive,
go.
I got to switch to dad mode and help out, And so I'm always on in that sense. The one thing I've learned though, when I do, need a break, let's say, is, and the reason I love being here in Colorado is it's always sunny. And even if it's cold outside, the sun is out and the sun is shining. And so my assistant, I think one of the best things I ever did was hire an assistant when I started finding some success and I could financially justify it. But my first assistant, she just started doing this thing where she could tell that like I was really stressed, or I was off, or, I just wasn't showing up, or she could tell I needed a break. And she almost said it like you say, like you speak to your dog. She's like, "Do you want to go outside? Do you want to go for a walk?" And she said it in jest at first, and I was just like, how do I wag my tail? Like, yes, I will. Thank you. I need a break. And so she moved on. She's a mom now, and it's awesome. We're still connected. But my next assistant, we just made that part of her job description. In Bella's offboarding and Lauren's onboarding, we said, okay, Lauren, like periodically remind RT to take a break, and do that by saying, hey, let's go take a walk. And so, yeah, I take a walk. I just do a lap around the building, or I walk around downtown. We're right downtown in the city in Fort Collins. So I grab a coffee, or I just take a lap and get some sunshine.
You can run a business till you can't run a business. Your health is so important. So it's nice to, get that little bit of insight about how you navigate these things. And oftentimes we're so close to the work that we don't see the fact that we need a break. So that's really great feedback. Yeah. Thank you so very much. Now, when you were growing up, tell us a little, was it in Colorado? Did you grow up around the local area? Tell us a little bit about life growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up on a Christmas tree farm in Pennsylvania, actually. About an hour west of Philadelphia, in a town called Reading.
And what do you remember? Do you have any fond memories you can share with us?
Oh, a ton. I mean, I was a fourth generation farmer and entrepreneur. My great grandfather started, it was called DeLong Christmas Tree Farm back in 1941. The farm was the side hustle for my family for all four generations. Everybody had a different job, and, Christmas trees, you're not going to make a huge amount of money, and you only make money for about 30 days. Yeah. so it's, but it was a beautiful business. It was a beautiful piece of property. We had 40 acres. And I was the only child. So, my parents would just send me outside, and I played with sticks.
Off you go. I think it's funny you should talk about that. We've got a Christmas tree farm literally just over the next hill from us, and we often go walking through it, and the smell. Can you remember that? It's such a beautiful smell.
Yeah, I mean, you can't forget things like that. No. The senses, and the smell is. I mean, literally, those trees are producing oxygen. So it's not just the smell; it's you are getting by percentage more oxygen every time you walk through that tree farm, and you do that. So that's very good for you. And I think that's
Yeah.
awesome. And I wish I could do that still.
Go find a
But
Christmas tree farm and walk through
yeah,
it.
yeah. But yeah, so that was my childhood, was, learning how to take care of the farm, take care of the business, learning how entrepreneurship works, how to run a small business, how you have to, we only made money 1 month a year, so you have to
To
save
make it,
most of
yeah,
what you make.
absolutely. So,
And
can
my
you?
dad and my grandpa taught me all that stuff.
Yeah, I was going to touch on inspirational people. Your parents and your grandparents obviously in the mix there, but you've got Hamosi as well. And are there still inspirational people in your life? Do you still get value out of listening to what others are achieving and their failures and successes, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, like my favorite podcast I listen to is the All In podcast, and I love hearing from those guys. I mean, the four of them are very, very successful. Deca, or what do they call it when you have hundreds of millions, or billionaires, right?
Yeah,
Like they're all
I
very,
know.
very successful, mostly tech. And that's really cool. And they talk about current events a lot, and a little bit of politics, and so it's fairly well rounded in my opinion. And so I look up to people like that who have been there, done that, and like Hormozy are they've made more money than they can ever spend, and they're still helping people, and they're still putting out content, and they're still giving back in that way, and they're still really active online. I love that. So I try to follow as many people like that as I can. And then I'm in a couple mastermind groups, just to stay connected to my peers and other people doing similar things or at similar levels to me. And I look up to them in different ways, right? A lot of them are more peers than that. But it's different. It's a different,
Different view.
atmosphere. And you can I mean, honestly, I feel like you learn more by trying to teach someone else or trying to mastermind with somebody else. Like if you're trying to help someone with their problem in a little mastermind group, I feel like halfway through me trying to help someone else, I'm like, man, I should do this in my own business. Like, why haven't I
Yeah,
had this idea? So
yeah.
it turns on a different part of your brain. So I really
Mm.
love, that side of networking and podcasting and masterminding.
You often hear people talking about how money's a byproduct of how much value they add in the marketplace. And, we come into the world naked, we leave naked with nothing. How much is money really worth to you? And I guess what's the end game for you? What do you want to leave this world in terms of let's call it a legacy?
Sure. So from a legacy standpoint, it's really that quote, the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not sit. And for me, that's my first goal that related to that was to get my name on a building. I thought that was a wonderful life achievement of somebody showing me the respect of putting my name on the side of a building. And that happened years ago for me right around when I turned 30. So that was fantastic and really cool. Is the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative. They named one of the buildings after me since I donated so much to the school.
Yep.
And I'm forever grateful. And that was such a cool thing. But yeah, all of that ties back into money, like you said, and leaving a legacy. But I don't think about that stuff very often. Financially, the thing that I'm after, one of my good friends said this. He said, I just want to live life on the left side of the menu. And I love that so much. I want to walk into a restaurant and order the steak and not look at, was it a $50 steak? Was it a $40 steak? Was it a $180 steak? It doesn't matter. That's what I want. And so that's what I'm going to get. And that number, I think, is different for everyone, right? Because we all have different lifestyles and different desires for our life and how we want to live. And you can be happy. Speaking of money doesn't buy happiness, you can be happy and you can live on the left side of the menu at every stage of life. It depends on the menu.
Yeah, great feedback.
So that's what I'm after is the financial freedom and to make enough that I'm not stressed about the day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And I'm really close. I mean, we have our dream house. I own this building where I have my manufacturing facility. Obviously, there's a lot of debt that's associated with those assets. But like at the end of the day, if I died today, like I accomplished the American dream. Like that's really
Yes.
cool. And I'm only 34, so it's just like, okay, well,
That's
what's next?
magic. Yeah, that is magic. Thank you so very much for feeding
Yeah.
back, RT. I love it. Now, given the fact that you've nearly achieved all of the things that you've had on your, I guess, your list of to-dos, what was the inspiration behind founding VORTIC Watches? Where did that all come from, and why did you do it?
Yeah, so my co-founder Tyler Wolf and I had the idea for Vortic on a golf course at Penn State when we were still studying. He was a math major, I was industrial engineering. And the core concept of Vortic Watch Company was just answering the question of why are watches not made in USA? Why are all watches seemingly made in China and Switzerland? What's going on with that? And that was the conversation on the golf course. And that led us down the deep rabbit hole of learning about watches and manufacturing and American manufacturing and American watch manufacturing, which has a rich history that many people don't know. And from 1850 to 1950, over 150 million pocket watches were manufactured in the United States,
Wow.
somewhere between Boston and Chicago. And we had no idea, and most people don't even know that America was the Switzerland of the world for that century. But back then, it was all pocket watches. And we found this out because we were trying to figure out how to make the movement or the gears and springs that tell time inside a watch. We were like, okay, we can make the outside of a wristwatch in America. That's just it's pieces of metal. Like we can figure this out. But the inside, all that little engine that tells time, like who makes that? And why are those movements made in China and Switzerland? Like what's going on with that? And we walked into a pawn shop to just see if we could buy a watch and take it apart and learn more. And the guy who owned the pawn shop happened to be a watchmaker and had worked on watches his whole life. And he melts down gold and silver of pocket watches, basically the cases of old pocket watches, and he melts them down because nobody uses them anymore.
Oh.
And he was just like, here, and he gave us a whole box of old American pocket watches and told us the story of what I call the great American watch companies: Hamilton, Elgin, Waltham, Ball, these amazing American brands that most people have never heard of because they made pocket watches, and that was 100 years ago, and nobody used pocket watches anymore. And so at some point throughout that, and this was, I was 21, we had the idea to take those old pocket watches, the guts of them, the movement, the dial, the face of it, and the hands, and upcycle the inside of those pocket watches into modern wristwatches. So it's 100 years old on the inside, and it's fully modern on the outside. And that's a Vortic watch, like Vortex and TikTok, a beautiful clash of old and new. Vortic Watch Company takes old pocket watches and turns them into wristwatches. We put that idea on Kickstarter in 2014, and we've sold every watch we've made since. It's the best idea I've ever had.
That's incredible. It's amazing. It's almost as if it was meant to be. Going through that store that day and then being handed these things. I love the fact that they're upcycled. I would never have known. I've seen these pieces on your website, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And they're a premium product. Now, tell us a little bit about, I guess, some of the ups and downs of this whole journey. I know that you had some legal challenges that you had to go through. I'd love to explore that if we can.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, it's very hard to do what we do, period. Like taking an old pocket watch that's 100 years old and restoring it. Like I said, it's a little engine that tells time. So there's hundreds of little gears and springs and screws inside there that you have to restore. It's been in a drawer at best for 100 years, and somebody has to clean it and oil it and time it and make sure it works again. And then we have to manufacture the outside. So we make the case and the crown and the hardware, and we source the glass and the leather to turn that pocket watch into a wristwatch. So tons of logistics, tons of supply chain issues that we had to solve, lots of, we call it here, not there. It doesn't make sense to take an American pocket watch and then put it into a made in China case.
No.
That's a shame. So it's like, okay, let's do it justice. Let's make all of that stuff, or as much as we possibly can, in America as well. And so that all just became part of the essence of the brand. And as we were building the brand after we launched on Kickstarter, to your point, we got sued by the world's largest watch conglomerate, which is the Swatch Group in Switzerland. And the Swatch Group owns the brand Hamilton. And Hamilton was one of those great American watch companies. Hamilton was like the Rolex of America. They made millions of pocket watches and wristwatches over time for almost about 100 years in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. ironically enough, my home state and now where my dad lives. And we, I was a kid. I didn't know anything about trademarks. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. We were just taking pocket watches and turning them into wristwatches. But if you think about it, and if you look at the watch, at vorticwatches.com, and you're checking out like, oh, the Vortic is a pocket watch turned into wristwatches, it still says the original brand on the face, on the dial of the watch. It says Hamilton or Bar or LG.
Yeah.
It didn't cross our mind, but we got a cease and desist from the Swatch Group, who owns the brand Hamilton, and they accused us of counterfeiting and trademark infringement, basically using their name to make money and or not explaining to our customers well enough that that was a Vortic watch and not a Hamilton watch, even though it says Hamilton on the front, and it says Vortic on the back, and it's clearly, I think, a pocket watch turned into a wristwatch.
Yeah.
So to try to make a very long story short, we got a cease and desist in about 2016. I received that cease and desist before I shipped a single watch to our first customer. It took us a year and a half after Kickstarter to like figure out how to make these watches. And so we got the cease and desist. For the next 2 years, I try to contact the people who run the Swatch Group and try to figure this out, because I'm a kid. I don't have any money. I can't legally defend ourselves. I was just like, hey, I don't think we're doing anything wrong here. I don't know anything about trademark law, but like, here's what we're doing. And eventually that led to an official lawsuit. So they sued us officially in 2017, like late 2017 sometime. And then it all came to like an inflection point on February 19 of 2020. I sat in federal court in the financial district of Manhattan, staring up at a judge in this massive courtroom, something you only see on TV. And in a federal courthouse in Manhattan in 2020, not the best time to be there. And I'm looking at this judge, and I take off my watch and I hand it to her, and my attorney at that point, we went through, I think 3, maybe 4 different attorneys throughout that, it's like about 6 years of lawsuit. My attorney at that point, he said, when she gives you a chance to tell your story, please don't stop talking, because you have not done anything wrong. And you just have to make sure she hears your story. You haven't violated any of these laws. And this is just big company against small company. It's classic David and Goliath, and she's going to see that. And that's what I did. And I just like we just went through, I told her I grew up on a Christmas tree farm. We had this idea on a golf course. We take pocket watches, turn them into wrist watches. And I took my watch off and I handed it to her, and they entered that in as Exhibit A. And then, I spent the whole day, in court trying to tell all these stories. And about 6 months later, that whole process takes a long time, a lot of federal resources that go into that.
Yeah.
And about 6 months later, we got a ruling from the judge. She wrote 40 pages of legal document to protect us and protect Vortic Watch Company from this big, conglomerate, but also protect the right to upcycle. Because if you think about it, if taking an old pocket watch with somebody else's brand on it and turning it into a wristwatch and upcycling that and charging a lot more for it and telling the whole story of it, if that is illegal, then so many other things are wrong, right? In that case, you wouldn't be able to take like a Coca-Cola bottle and turn it into a lamp, or whatever, right? Like it's the whole concept of upcycling. And she saw it. And one of the judges throughout, there was a bunch of different federal judges that looked at it, because we went to the appellate court. They appealed it. There's a whole thing. We almost made it to the Supreme Court before Swatch Group dropped it. But one of the judges throughout the process, she said, this is an interesting case, and you do not want to be the defendant in an interesting case. And what she meant by that is there was no case law. There was no other legal cases. There was there was some mildly similar things, but the most similar thing was a case it's called Champion Spark Plugs. And, from 100 years ago. and people were refurbishing Champion Spark Plugs and selling them as authentic refurbished spark plugs. And it's like, okay, how is the most recent and similar case from that far ago? That's why it was interesting. And so we had to take it all the way, and we had to properly defend ourselves. And, thankfully I found an attorney that was willing to do it all basically on contingency. I mean, I couldn't afford to pay, and
No.
he never asked me for money. He just said, "Hey, let's figure this out."
Let's do it.
So
Tell me.
and now he's protecting watch companies left and right.
I bet he is. You know, it's
unending business.
it's a knock-on effect. I reckon he knew that. But
Yep, karma comes back in good and bad ways. So
well,
for him, it was great.
I really appreciate you sharing that story because, you know, I'm sitting here, my shoulders are getting tensed up, just taking me through that journey. I'm thinking, wow, what did it feel like the day after you got the ruling?
I mean, gosh, the weight that was lifted was immense. Because through the whole time, I mean, I was having kids, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just, you know, 2019, my kids were little. I mean, I had a baby on the way at that point when I was sitting in court. It was crazy. You know, I'm just trying to run a company. I'm trying to grow business.
Trying to do the thing. Yep.
And I'm trying to do the thing that I thought I was supposed to do. And yeah, we almost had it ripped away from us multiple times over and over again throughout that whole process. But now it's like, I mean, I can tell you anything you ever want to know about trademark law.
I bet you can.
I learned so much. I mean, the past 10 years, that's like, you could call my business successful. It's a 7-figure business. It's great. We have 10 employees. You know, like I said, I have the real estate. It's great. It's the American dream.
Yep.
It's not enough for me. I want more. I want to grow a big company. I want to do other things. But regardless of what I want and what I've achieved and what we've been able to do with our brand and the company, whatever I do next, whether it's just tomorrow or the next company or the next thing, I mean, this last 10 years has been the best education I could possibly get on how to run a business and how to do all these things. And it's because I've experienced all that stuff, right? Like, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Of course. So it makes me ask the obvious next question. We have a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, existing business owners who tune into the My Future Business Show, RT. And I'm wondering, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs that are facing, startup challenges? What should they be looking out for? I know trademark's an obvious one.
Yeah. I mean, to sum it all up, I just don't be afraid to ask for help. And you should be asking stupid questions every day, every hour of every day. You should be asking everyone you ever meet for help and advice. Like when I was starting out, I thought I could do it myself. I thought I could just Google it. I thought it would be okay. I felt bad asking people for their time. You know, I didn't connect with people. I didn't, you know, I would meet someone who's really successful, and I should have just said, "Hey, you have 5 minutes? Can I just pick your brain, or can I buy you a cup of coffee?" Like,
yep.
When I started doing stuff like that is when business really took off for me, because I started becoming a sponge and I started learning things. I started asking all the questions that I had in my brain. Like, I think life kills your curiosity over time. And so you got to let that go. Like, you got to let that come out, and you got to ask those questions, because if you stop being curious, you're going to stop growing. And I was afraid, you know, I was afraid to look stupid or sound stupid. And so when I got over that is when, you know, there was a huge inflection point for me, in the lawsuit and just in business.
Great feedback. I know that from that point in time, you had some meteoric growth, because obviously the shackles had been removed and you had that freedom and the vitality was back, I guess you could say. What was some of the things that you did with VORTIC to achieve that rapid, almost exponential growth? What sort of marketing did you do?
Yeah, well, so our business is so different than many, but you know, I think the best decision that I made, especially like during the pandemic, you know, for most of I would say for half of the life of the company until the pandemic, so like in around 2020, and before, we were selling mostly custom watches. You know, you would either bring us grandpa's pocket watch and we'd turn it into a wristwatch as a service, or We had a bunch of pocket watches on our website, and we had this really cool, we call it the watch builder. It was a photo layering system where you could take a pocket watch and design a wristwatch around it, and then we would make it to order, and it was awesome. But you had to pay in full upfront, and it took 4 to 6 months to get your watch.
Yeah.
In the pandemic and in 2020 and after until now, people want instant gratification. When there's a fear of the unknown, like there was back then, or just in general now, I call it the Amazon effect. People do not want to wait 4 to 6 months for something. And so the pivot that we made was, I realized that we were averaging about 1 watch per day from a production standpoint, just from our custom process.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just flipped the switch on that, and we said, hey, we're just going to make the decisions for you. We're going to find these old pocket watches. We're going to build them into wristwatches using what we think will look cool. And now every day, Monday through Friday, we have a watch of the day. One new one-of-a-kind watch releases on VORTICWatches.com at 12 noon Mountain Time every single day, Monday through Friday. And it was the best idea I've ever had. It's just, it creates urgency. It gives you, from a marketing standpoint, something new to talk about every single day. If you go on our Instagram, there's a new watch every single day. There's always content. There's always pictures. There's a story of history of that watch every single time, because they're all one of a kind. And so it's just like, this watch was made in 1917 in Rockford, Illinois. And here's a fun fact, in Rockford, Illinois in 1917, the price of gas was XYZ cents, right? It's every single day there's something new to talk about. So to really sum up all of that, the biggest things that I did to create growth and change the business were change the business. It's the willingness and the ability to make a pivot. That was a huge pivot for us. But that pivot turned into, really doubling the business across that next 2 years. And it made it a much more fun company to run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That willingness to pivot, innovate, change, remain, I guess, agile and keep moving. How important is that? Do you obviously have your eyes on the horizon for further changes? Is that a mentality that you have adopted?
Yeah, I try not to change too many things at once. I'm an engineer and I'm a data guy. You got to make sure you're scientific about it.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, you got to change with the times. You got to roll with it and figure out what to do next. Like we were talking about before we hit record. The tariffs and all of that stuff right now is creating the need for either change or, most people are kind of waiting and seeing. So we're not waiting. We make watches in America, so the tariffs don't really impact me too much. I just said, okay, let's just keep making watches. When the economy rights itself, we'll have a lot more inventory and we'll be poised and ready. And so that's it.
I'd love to know, are you, given all of these questions that are in the marketplace now, are you shipping internationally? Is that something that you're aspiring to, or is it local only?
Yeah, we ship all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really my only interactions with tariffs before recently have been the export tariffs, that get charged on American-made goods shipped elsewhere.
Yeah.
Which is obviously different now and was different for every country. But it's cool. I think people outside of America, I feel like most of our customers outside the US are either expats or, they have some kind of tie to these American companies and the history of it. And they think it's, they think what we do is cool. But we just started another brand called Colorado Watch Company.
Yes.
And Colorado Watch Company is much more scalable. For VORTIC, I can only make a few hundred watches a year. So international sales don't move the needle too much for us.
Mm-hmm.
But Colorado Watch Company, I'm trading on the fact that in a lot of places in the rest of the world, American made is synonymous with quality and value and luxury in some places. And so we can make one of, if not the only American made watch at scale. And the reason I called it Colorado Watch Company is because everyone loves Colorado. If you are not from America, you still know what Colorado is.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You think we live in the side of a mountain and it's snowing and it's beautiful and it's pristine every day. I'm in the high desert in a little town, nobody's ever heard of.
But nobody knows that.
It's different. But there's nothing bad about Colorado. Everyone's just oh, cool. That's a fun place, right?
Yeah.
So So it's just
Absolutely.
it's going to be such a fun brand to grow in the US and
And
elsewhere.
abroad,
And
yeah,
really the premise is just made in USA at scale. Like we
of
say, why
course.
let the Swiss have all the fun? Let's make it
Yeah,
in Colorado.
of course. I'm absolutely loving this call. Learned so much, much more than what I had expected. Now, tell us a little bit more. I know we touched on this earlier, RT, about the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative. How important is that for you?
Yeah, so my last name's Custer, and I am related to General Custer. And my dad, when I was little, made sure that I knew the significance of that and what it meant. And I think for him telling me some of those stories and him, telling me some of the history about our ancestor, it helped spark this passion in me for history. And I've always loved history, and that's why VORTIC Watch Company is just perfect for me, because it's such this amazing combination of historical research, marketing, and manufacturing. So I'm an engineer by trade. So um, I love history. I love military history. I grew up learning about specifically American military history.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many stories that still many people don't know about all the different wars in America and elsewhere. Um, and so I'm always just fascinated by that stuff. And I have a huge respect for our military and just people who serve, right? I did not serve, but I do not get the chance to be an entrepreneur unless I live in a free country that's protected by someone somewhere else that does not know my name but is risking their life right now to protect my freedom. And I believe that in my soul. And if I can do anything to make their lives a little better when they come home and they retire and they're a veteran and they're doing something else now, I'm all in. And so, again, trying to make a long story short,
No, that's
we had
great.
we had somebody bring us a World War II pocket watch.
Oh.
This was back in 2019. Somebody brought us an old pocket watch from World War II. It was used by the navigators in the Second World War on B-17s and similar aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked us to turn it into a wristwatch. And I started doing all this research on this, and I realized that Hamilton Watch Company made 120,000 of that pocket watch for the navigators just during World War II. It was the only way you could buy it. Like civilians could not buy the watch. It was just for the war.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a true 24-hour dial. It was the most accurate pocket watch made during the Second World War. Um, and so I started collecting them, and I got to 50. And so on November 11th, on Veterans Day of 2019, we released the military edition, is what we call it. And we take 50 of those World War II navigators pocket watches and turn them into wristwatches. Just one day a year is the only day you can buy it, Veterans Day. And we take 10% of the proceeds at that time. Now it's just it's an amount, it's $500 per watch
Yeah.
to make it easy. And we donate that to a school in Delaware called the Veterans Watchmaker Initiative. And around that same time in 2019, somebody told me about that school, and I was like, "Oh, this is perfect. We can have this amazing product and tell stories of World War II and celebrate veterans, and also give back to the school." And the school, they teach U.S. military vets how to be watchmakers. And it's one of the only schools in the U.S. that trains watchmakers, and they specifically train veterans. And so that's our give back. That's our only charity. That's who we support. That's who we
That's
are.
where it came
And
from.
my friend Sam, who runs that nonprofit, is just. I mean, he's dedicated his life to doing just that.
Yeah, great. That's such amazing feedback. It must feel really, really good to know that you're contributing in many of the ways that you are doing. Now, out of all of the watches that you have had come through your hands, literally, do you have a favorite?
I mean
Oh,
I
tough
call it.
question.
Yeah, it's a tough question. So, I mean, my favorite personal watch is what we call Exhibit A, which was the watch it was my first watch, and it was the watch I handed to the judge on, I call it Judgment Day. I was in federal court that day, and I handed it to her, and we entered it into the legal process. So that's my favorite watch. It's in my collection. Those pocket watches though that I was talking about from World War II, we call it the military edition that comes out every year on Veterans Day. That's by far my favorite story of watch, and there's enough of them that most of the watches we make, there's only one, and that's awesome, but it's gone. Somebody buys it and it's that person's watch, and so.
Yeah.
The military edition, since we can make 50 a year, I can keep talking about it. I can go deeper on the stories. I can make it look different every year. We've done it. It'll be 7 years this year. Every year, the case of it changes, so the style changes, even though it's the same pocket watch inside. So that's definitely my favorite, piece of history that we upcycle. Is it's called the Hamilton 4992B. But it was the Master Navigational Watch, and it was a pocket watch.
It's amazing. What a great call. I wonder, you must have get a lot of personal satisfaction when you see somebody experiencing your pieces. They've purchased it, they've acquired it somehow through VORTIC. How does that make you feel to see that joy?
I mean, it's validating for sure. And it's exciting. It's why I do it. Like I love talking to customers. I do all the trade shows myself. I don't let anyone else go to the any chance I can get to meet with and talk to our customers. I love doing that. And people come up and they're wearing their watch that they bought last year or 10 years ago, and they bring it so they can see me and meet me, and it's the coolest thing ever. But really what's fun is, the customers stick around. I think with most brands, you buy something and then, you get your next watch or something else from somewhere else. And so you unsubscribe from their email list because you already bought something from them, and, you kind of move on. But in 10 years, we've sold 3,000 watches roughly. And that was only to roughly 2,000 customers. So, 60% of my customers bought at least a second or third, or some of them have 10 watches from us. And then I have an email list of those people. And so of those 2,000 customers, there are still 1,700 people on my email list actively subscribed, even now years after they made their purchase from us. They still care about what we do every day. They're still getting my emails every week with, the watches of the day. And I call it the weekly roundup. I just send one email with all the 5 watches we made this week. They follow us on social, and they come to those trade shows, and they see me in person, and they see what's new. And I'm so grateful for that. It's like a community of customers that feel like they're invested in the brand, because honestly they are. They're supporting my American dream, and they feel like they're in it with me, and I just think that's so cool.
That wonderful story from the start of this call. You had a narrative there. There's no guessing. It's all genuine. It's American made. It's veterans focused. It's upcycling. It's all these amazing things. There's no doubt in my mind why people are wanting to buy VORTIC or Colorado pieces through you, because you're doing such an amazing job. Now, when people who are listening to this want to learn more, buy your products, let's call them, where are they going to go? Where's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, VORTICwatches.com or ColoradoWatchCompany.com. If you're not in a place you can type that in, if you're listening to this while you're driving, like I listen to podcasts, just Google search Colorado Watch Company, and you'll there's only one.
There's only one. You'll find it.
Yep. And you'll see my face on the website, but I'm just RT Custer on really all platforms. You can connect with me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'd love to chat.
Well, everybody who is on today's call, you're listening in to this call. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We're certainly going to make sure that those links are available to you no matter where you find this call. In fact, if you see the post or it's on social, there'll be a link back to RT, his team, and all of the wonderful watches that they're making at VORTIC and Colorado Watch Company. And with that all being said, RT, thank you so very much for joining me on the show today. What a wonderful call.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Appreciate you.